And I would like to thank everyone for joining us as I present these two studies, one of which is the lead chapter of the PIDS Economic Policy Monitor for 2024-2025, where we assess the recent performance and near-term outlook of the Philippine macroeconomy, identify key opportunities and risks that policymakers, businesses, and the public must navigate amid a continuously evolving economic landscape. And before we proceed, I would like again to acknowledge my collaborators on the study, Mr. Mark Gerald Ruiz and Ms. Ria Miral. Their contributions were instrumental in the completion of this two scientific work. Next slide, please. So due to time constraints, I will not be able to cover all the macroeconomic variables discussed in the report, but I encourage everyone to access the full study, which is of course available for free on the PIDS website. Now, since taking the helm of preparing this report on an annual basis, I have continued to adapt the best practices embedded in the overall structure of the report, while also introducing specific innovations, particularly in how we frame the theme and the analysis of the report. And I'm showing you here the 2024-2025 edition, whose focus was on identifying pathways towards achieving upper middle income status, a milestone that the Philippines narrowly missed in 2025 for a range of structural and external reasons. But building on that context, now when we started preparing for the next edition, the 2025-2026 report is themed Restoring Confidence, which reflects the economic and institutional predicaments that the Philippines has experienced in recent months and in recent years. And I look forward to further evolving this thematic narrative for the succeeding reports. And for 2025 to 2026, the key message of the report emphasizes from the fact that the Philippines has demonstrated some degree of stability, but it remains to be fragile. Based from the statistics, we're not technically in a crisis because inflation is under control, the financial system remains sound, and economic growth remains to be positive. However, as per the theme of this report, confidence among investors, businesses, and even households, it remains to be thin. That's why at its core, the report asks a simple but critical question, which I invite everyone to also think about it. Can the Philippines sustain growth and move forward? Or will it remain stuck below its true potential? So let's think about that question as we go along. Next slide, please. Now, because initial conditions matter, it is imperative to be very clear about where we stand today as the new starting point for reform. And from the graph that's presented in front of you right now, in 2024, the Philippine economy actually grew by 5.7% adjusted during year end, while inflation averaged around 3.2% back within the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas target range. And up to the third quarter of 2025, average growth stood at 4.96%, with inflation easing further to 1.7%. By historical standards, we can claim that these are still, it remains to be respectable numbers. However, growth has consistently fallen short of government targets. A lot of agencies have already downgraded their growth forecast, and indicative of that the economic momentum has softened heading into 2026 from 2025. In other words, while headline macroeconomic indicators signal stability, the economy is not accelerating at a pace that we had hoped for. Stability may have returned, but ambition has yet to be fully translated into real outcomes. Next slide. So maybe you're asking now, so why is growth slowing? Okay. First, based on the statistics that we have gathered, investments remain to be weak. especially public infrastructure execution. Second, climate and weather disruptions continue to affect agriculture, food prices, even jobs. 2025 has seen a lot of these episodes disrupting the growth momentum. And third, global uncertainty from trade tensions to higher tariffs, it has made many firms cautious. And finally, governance and execution bottlenecks are weighing in on confidence. In short, what does this mean? What does this tell us? Ano sinasabi nito sa atin? We are growing. Yes, we are growing, but not fast enough. And perhaps, if I may put it this way, not securely enough. So next slide. That's why this report, we adopted a descriptive and evidence-based approach as we observe how the economy actually behaves over time. And in doing so, we ask three fundamental questions, which I suppose you're also asking these questions during 2025. What happened? What is happening now? And what does this imply moving forward? So the approach that we're taking in the next slides would be very useful in periods of uncertainty as it may help households, businesses, policymakers, even you, make more informed and grounded decisions. But why is that so? No? It's because economic risk arises from macroeconomic conditions that can lead, that may lead to significant losses for firms and households, even at the individual level. These include inflation, exchange rate movements, changes in government policy, government regulations, even policy decisions that may adversely affect cost, revenues, profitability, and such risks are inherently difficult to anticipate and predict. Now, let's admit that forecasting all of these variables may prove to be very challenging. But without a clear economic risk management strategy, individuals and businesses expose themselves to unnecessary vulnerabilities, putting profitability, resilience, even long-term growth at risk. Okay? So next slide. I just wanted to share this with you because we analyzed the economy in this report and also in the succeeding presentation through interconnected blocks. Namely, and you're seeing it in the diagram in front of you, the blocks would include domestic demand, trade, labor, monetary conditions, and prices. Now, from the diagram in itself, we're applying here systems thinking. Okay? The economy functions as a system, wherein when one block weakens, let's say investment, it will now ripple through other blocks, affecting employment, income, even confidence. So this system's view, it matters because growth challenges are rarely driven by a single factor. They usually emerge from interactions across the system, which means that effective policy must address linkages rather than isolated symptoms, which is the very core of systems thinking. Next slide. Okay, so let's move into domestic demand. Okay, domestic demand. So household consumption based on data remains to be the primary engine of growth. This is supported by easing inflation and the steady remittance inflows. Government spending may have picked up, particularly on wages and social services. Investment, however, it remains to be a weak link. This is because capital formation has slowed, most notably in infrastructure, reflecting election-related delays, which I will be explaining later on, policy uncertainty, and the persistent execution constraints that we had in 2025. This matters because consumption, as we all know, it sustains growth in the short term, but it is the investment component that determines growth in the long term. So consumption po pang short run, investment pang matagalan. And without a revival in productive investment, and let me qualify that, productive investment, today's stability risks becoming tomorrow's stagnation. So that trap that we are trying to avoid. Okay, next slide. From domestic demand, let's go to external or the trade sector. On the external front, based on data, services exports, particularly in the IT, BPM sectors, and tourism, they remain to be key strengths, okay? Though their growth is beginning to moderate. Okay? Merchandise exports, it faced mounting headwinds, particularly from the higher US tariffs and a softer global demand. And at the same time, imports remain to be elevated. As an importing economy, keeping the trade deficit wide and reinforcing the economy's sensitivity to external shocks must have to be considered and managed. Next slide. So let's go to the third block. Let's go to employment or the labor market. Employment has remained relatively resilient, but job quality remains to be uneven. And why is that so? Let's break it down. Agriculture continues to shed jobs, while services sector dominate employment. But we have to qualify that. Growth in the services employment is often in lower productivity or informal activities. So if that is the case, then even if we continue to expand the services sector, it does not necessarily generate inclusion. It doesn't necessarily increase income because they remain to be at that level of the value chain. And as a result, while more people are working, many are not in jobs that generate sustained income growth or even productivity gains. So as far as the labor market is concerned, this disconnect between employment and earning constraints ultimately limits how inclusive growth can materialize for the whole economy. Okay, next slide, please. Now, let's go to prices and monetary conditions. So I decided to just lump them together. We have seen in 2025 that inflation has eased significantly. It gave the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas room to begin a gradual normalization of monetary policy, relaxation of policy rates. And liquidity in the financial system remains to be ample. Banks remain well capitalized and stable, and credit growth continues its momentum. Yet, investment activity remains to be cautious, driven by a slowdown as well or a decline in confidence. But this divergence is telling us something critical. Okay. What is that? What is that? What is this telling? What is the data telling us? That the binding constraint of the Philippines may no longer be just the availability of money, but actually the confidence to actually deploy it. For instance, investors are waiting not for cheaper credit, but for clearer signals, credible policy directions, predictable regulations, and most importantly, effective execution. Okay, so after discussing the brief picture of the blocks that I have mentioned earlier, so next slide, let's go to the outlook for 2025 to 2026. So looking ahead, economic growth is projected at around 5% in 2025, though there are agencies that have already cut down their growth projections, and this growth estimate for 2025 is very much aligned with the forecast of our multilateral agencies, Asian Development Bank and the World Bank, and about 5.3% in 2026, with inflation expected to remain within the BSP's target range. These are deemed to be still deemed to be respectable outcomes by regional standards, but as we all know, they remain below the economy's pre-pandemic potential. While this figure signals stability, it does not yet tell us that economic transformation is happening. So whether the Philippines does better will depend less on the forecasts we produce, but more on the policies we execute, how well we implement reforms, deliver public investments, and translate macroeconomic stability, the stability that I mentioned earlier, into sustained productivity and quality job creation. Next slide. So, key risks that we need to watch out for. So the main risks are very clear based on our discussion earlier. Okay? There is a global economic slowdown, rising protectionism among developed economies, more frequent and severe climate-related shocks, a fragile investment recovery, and persistent governance risk. So we need to watch out for those headwinds. No? But among this, I would like to zoom in on governance as the most pervasive risk. Why? It's because governance can cut across all other risks. It can shape how effectively inflation is managed, how confident investors commit to capital, how jobs are created and sustained, and even how resilient the economy is to exchange rate pressures. As you all know, right? The peso dollar exchange rate is on the lower 60 level almost. So those have to be watched out for. But then going back on the governance component, literature is clear wherein it argued that when governance is weak, shocks amplify. Okay? And when it is strong, when governance is strong, the economy is able to absorb stress and, of course, recover faster. So next slide, please. So in preparing for the report that I'm currently presenting, we actually appealed to a futures thinking approach to macroeconomics. I'm not sure if most of you have heard of this type of thinking, but then futures thinking is simply a systematic, multidisciplinary approach to exploring multiple possible futures rather than predicting a single outcome. Okay, so it uses tools such as scenario planning, if you've heard of that, backcasting, that helps us shape desirable futures, avoid undesirable ones, and design resilient strategies and policies. But why? No? Why is this study utilizing futures thinking in its policy formulation? Okay, we may all be aware that the institutionalization of the futures thinking function within the Department of Economy, Planning and Development is actually a key reform under the RA 12145 or the Economy Planning and Development Act. And the primary goal here is that we want to align in embedding long-term strategic policymaking into the government's planning process. Because we want to ensure, as early as now, that the nation's development trajectory is resilient despite all these economic or political changes. There's still a silver lining. Okay, next slide, please. And just please bear with me with this one. I just wanted to bring out, or to bring up again, the term, the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and disruptive economy, because traditionally, economic planning relies on forecasting, extending today's trend into the future. That approach in the futures thinking framework, it works reasonably well in stable environments. But in a VUCA world like what the Philippines is experiencing right now or into right now, forecasting requires another complementary approach. Okay? And this is where futures thinking becomes essential, particularly backcasting, wherein we identify a vision, what we want, what kind of economy do we want in the future, and then we work backwards so that we can identify things that we can do now, not tomorrow, now, that will allow us to get to that intended future. In short, backcasting forces us to decide where we want to go and what must we do today to get there. That's why this report is really more of talking about what are the things that we have to do today to get to our intended future. So next slide. And we're very familiar with where we want to go. Okay, the future economy we aspire to is a resilient, inclusive, productive, climate-ready, and anchored on trust. And this vision is fully aligned with the Ambition 2040. We can get there. I am very optimistic we can get there, but we need to do something today. The challenge now is is not a lack of realism or imagination. The challenge that we're currently facing right now is resolve. Why is that so? It's because the question now is whether we are prepared to take the difficult, sometimes unpopular steps today to strengthen institutions, improve governance, restore trust and confidence, disciplining public spending, investing in people, in regions, and confronting these climate and global risks head on. Okay. And under the futures thinking approach, the future cannot be built by aspirations alone. It can be built by the choices that we make now, given what we know. Okay, so next slide. And for that future to be realized, so based on the information and the data that we have crunched, this in a descriptive manner, analyzing trends, looking into what's happening right now, thinking about that future, and for that future to be realized, foundations must already be firmly in place by 2030. So this is how futures thinking work, no? This means that public investment program, we need that, no? We need that to be credible, to be timely, execution ready, so that economic failure does not arrive suddenly. Okay? We do not want that. Okay? We need to quietly build into today's choices through reforms, good execution, and creating fixes over long-term discipline. Okay? And the future succeeds or fails in the present. Okay? So what are we going to do now? Okay? Based on the information that we have, based on the observation that we have, based on the discussion, what's on the table, what must we do now? Okay? And from the macroeconomic prospects that we prepared in 2024, 25, 25, 26, and also based on the several reports released by the private sector and multilateral organizations, it has been very clear, no, that for now, today, we need to treat governance as a macroeconomic policy because credibility anchors expectations. It lowers risk premiums, and attracts investment without additional public spending. Okay. Second, we need to spend better, not just more. Okay. Because in a world of tight fiscal space, by prioritizing high-impact programs, reducing unnecessary leakages, and aligning budgets with long-term productivity rather than short-term politics. Third, we need to fix public investment execution, where delays, bottlenecks, and weak coordination quietly erodes growth, weaken confidence, and inflate project costs. That's why this is where the theme of restoring confidence is coming from. Okay. And fourth, and I guess all of us are very aware of this one, we need to prepare for a harsher global environment marked by tighter financial conditions, geopolitical fragmentation, and more frequent external shocks. But here's the reminder, delays today does not preserve flexibility. It only guarantees higher costs tomorrow. That's why in our policy recommendation, we're emphasizing the need for an action today. So next slide. So as a policy message, I would like to end the macroeconomic prospect study presentation with this. Okay. That good governance is the most powerful, one of the most powerful macroeconomic stabilizer. It attracts private investments without requiring additional public spending. It makes every peso of taxpayers' money work harder and at the same time deliver more. And in a VUCAD world, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and disruptive world, credibility is our most valuable currency. And the economy that we want tomorrow, the Ambition 2040, depends on the discipline that we demonstrate today. And on that note, final slide, please. Thank you so much. Ambition 2040 and our pursuit of upper middle income status, they are not trophies to be claimed, but rather they are commitments. We must live up to every year. It will reflect in data, every year, every budget, every reform, and commitments to coherent policies across administrations, to institutions that are competent and credible, and the courage to do what makes economic sense even when it is not politically easy. So to end now, the reform journey is a collective one. If we act together with clarity and resolve, of course, the Ambition 2040 will not just be a vision, but it will be a lived reality. For this first study, maraming salamat po. Thank you very much. Dagan kaayong salamat. So please allow me, sorry.
Tuloy mo na, Dr. JP, no? Hanggang sa election year stimuli.
So ituloy na po natin ang ating
Yes.
usapan. I know you have burning questions, but feel free to put them in the chat box. I would be more than happy to discuss this with you because this is an alternative way to look at the economy and involving the public, involving the Filipino people in the discourse, enrich our understanding of the economy. So I think my slide for the election spending study is already up, so we can begin. Okay, so cover slide first. Again, I thank my research collaborators, Mr. Mark Ruiz and Ms. Ria Miral, for their assistance, for their contribution, for their expertise in completing this study. As what President Randy has mentioned earlier, the study presents evidence on how election cycles affect economic performance and connect those findings to what we have discussed earlier, the broader macroeconomic outlook. So ano po ba yung naging papel ng election year, which is 2025, to that macroeconomic prospects that I have discussed? So we get a full picture of those futures thinking that I mentioned to you earlier. Okay, next slide. Maybe you're asking, why does this study matter now? Okay? Bakit ito kailangan pag-usapan? Bakit ito kailangan gawin? It is because we are all aware that 2025 is an election year, particularly a midterm election year. As what I have mentioned earlier in the macroeconomic study, prospect study, growth momentum has softened, fiscal space is tightening, and confidence remain to be fragile. Election periods often feel like boom times. It's an economic boom. But the key question, which again I invite you to think about, okay? Are those gains, do they last? That's a very question that we can post, we can discuss around. Okay, next slide. And again, I really like this. So identifying or defining where we stand today. O review lang po tayo na napag-usapan natin kanina. Based on my previous presentation, growth returned but below targets. Inflation normalized. Investment recovery was uneven. External risk remained to be elevated. That's why it makes it very especially important to understand temporary versus sustainable drivers of growth. But we have to understand as well, and I don't know if you will agree with me, that the Philippine economy is not weak. It's not weak. Maybe it's the optimistic economist in me. But I would be honest that the Philippine economy, even if it's not weak, it is vulnerable. The macroeconomic fundamentals, the indicators, they are stable. But stability alone does not guarantee economic transformation. So, having refreshed that key finding, let's go back to this election study. what did we examine here? So, ito po yung research question namin. How do election-related shocks affect the Philippine economy? So the approach that we took is a macroeconometric simulation using quarterly data from 2002 to 2023, while we were able to simulate as many macroeconomic variables and indicators as we can. For this particular presentation, I would like to focus on consumption, employment, investment, and government consumption. Okay, so the entire model is not new. It has been the PIDS small macroeconometric model authored by or created by Dr. Debuque Gonzalez and Mr. Corpus as published in this PIDS research paper series. So if you want to look into the nitty-gritty of the model, okay, if you want to slice, dissect the model, this publication of PIDS would show it to you. Okay, but I would just like to bring you here. Okay, next slide. So the simulation in this study, as what I have mentioned earlier, is generated using the PIDS macroeconometric model. So rather than, maybe you're asking, but hindi ka nalang gumawa ng bagong model. Okay? But my thought process is telling me that rather than constructing a new macroeconometric framework, I would like to build on and extend an existing model so that I can demonstrate its robustness, simulation capability across different policy and economic scenarios. Okay? By applying the model to a new research question that I have mentioned earlier, okay, introducing new shock configuration, our analysis provides a proof of concept of its explanatory and predictive power, while ensuring consistency, comparability with previous PIDS macroeconometric assessments. Marami na po kasi mga macroeconometric models, and I feel like I really wanted to test the capabilities, the robustness of these models in recreating, in giving us key findings about certain shock analysis. Okay, so you will see here the conceptual model and the equations that encompass that model. Again, the details, you can access that in the PIDS research paper series I have shown. Okay, but so that we are all on the same page, okay, what we did in the macroeconometric simulation is to generate what we call in-sample simulations and election spending shock scenario. Dito po, nag-introduce na tayo ng election year. We ask the model or we tag certain time periods to be election years. Okay, so to be very brief about this, and please bear with me as I go very technical about this, in the figures that you're seeing on the screen right now, the solid blue lines on the left panel, okay, they represent the actual observed data. While the broken red lines, they depict the model's dynamic forecast. We want to check if the model can indeed simulate actual data. Okay. On the right panel, for the simulation results, the solid green lines indicate the baseline scenario. It simply means that when we say baseline scenario, it reflects the economy's expected path in the absence of shocks. So wala pa po tayong ini-introduce na shock. It's simply the baseline. Normal progression of data. Okay? But if you will look at the broken red lines, they illustrate the shock scenario. Meaning, the red line and the green line, comparing the two, you will now see deviations from the baseline resulting from the imposed shock or the imposed disturbance. Okay? So you'll get a copy, I think, of this one, and you can find that also in the discussion paper for more details. But let's go to the key findings. Next slide, please. So based on our findings, these are the headline results. Okay. Number one, election years stimulate growth, but the effects are temporary. Second, election-driven growth is real. I'm telling you, it's real. They do drive growth, but it is cyclical rather than structural. And during election years, we have seen that the economy, indeed, it speeds up. However, it slows back down once the election ends. Okay? So let's go into the details. Next slide, please. Let's look at the channel of private consumption. Okay? What's the key implications of the simulation that we generated? Number one, we have seen that during election periods, consumption rises sharply. They are driven by transfers, campaign spending, even optimism. Okay. However, we can see from the graph that after the election period, the effects dissipate. They quickly revert back to its normal trajectory post-election. And we can derive three key takeaways from this finding. Number one, as far as households are concerned, they spend more because money circulates faster during election periods. But once the election ends, so does the stimulus. Therefore, there is no lasting income effect. It is temporal. Consumption growth is cyclical, not structural. That's the first channel. Let's look at the second channel, which is employment. Okay. So based on our simulation, we have seen that employment also rises, particularly in the areas of construction, logistics, and services, all of which they are linked to election activity. And mind you, these jobs are real. They are helpful to our fellow Filipinos. But in the short term, they normalize, they just simply go back to pre-election trajectories post-election. Job quantity improves briefly. Job quality and productivity, we did not see them permanently shifting. Okay? So real jobs are created, but they are in the short term. Constructions, logistic, campaign-related services, they benefit briefly, but then they normalize. Now, let's look at the third channel, which is investment. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, investment. Okay. So, investment, in our simulation, we've seen modest pre-election uptake. And it becomes stronger when PPPs are present. Okay, public-private partnerships are present. But long-term investment, as what private sector has been observing, okay, they remain to be cautious. But why is that so? Literature is very clear about investors having this habit, if I may call it that way, to wait for policy clarity, regulatory stability, even credible execution beyond the election cycle. So there's a wait and see scenario in the investment component. Hence, okay, that moderate uptick pre-election increase. Okay. So let's look at another channel. Let's look at the government consumption channel. Okay. From our simulation, we have seen that spending is front-loaded before elections. Okay. For trivial reasons. Okay. There's an election spending ban, right? If I'm not mistaken. Okay. But post-election, normalization or slowdown is being demonstrated. But then there is a risk of distorted spending priorities. Okay. So what does this mean? Election cycles influence when we spend, but not always how well we spend during election period. So what does this tell us? Okay. The risk is the distorted priorities that favor timing over impact. Okay. So given these four channels, next slide. From our study, when we were dissecting the results, we asked the question, what election-led growth is and is not? Okay. And looking into literature, looking into grassroots discussion, we've seen that election-led growth can be characterized as demand-driven, it is short-term, and it is politically timed. But election-led growth is not based on the simulation, is not productivity enhancing, it is not investment-led, and it is not also self-sustaining. So what's the key takeaway here? So how do we summarize this? No? So the economy grows because money moves, okay, during election periods, not because productivity necessarily improves. And making that distinction between when money moves and when productivity improves is very crucial in understanding and in characterizing ano ba talaga yung election-led growth. Okay? Okay, next slide, please. So let's link our findings to the macroeconomic prospects I have discussed earlier. The evidence in the simulation aligns with the macro outlook. Growth in 2025 is partly supported by election stimulus. But for 2026, we might face post-election risks. Okay? Without reforms, momentum will fade, and sustainability depends on reforms, not on political cycles. Okay? So sustained momentum, again, depends on reforms and execution, not on cycles. Okay? Next slide, please. Linking it again, no, because we're talking about restoring confidence, no? Good governance. So what's the role of governance here? No? A central insight when we were looking into the results of all the other macroeconomic indicators is that a central indicator or a central insight would really boil down to governance. Because weak governance weakens policy transmission. Election cycles, on the other hand, can amplify volatility. That's why it is very important that credibility shapes investment decisions, currency expectations, even confidence. Where institutions are weak, spending delivers fewer lasting results. And I just wanted to look at this from an overview. The findings that we were able to generate using all the other macroeconomic indicators suggest that while fiscal expansions, such as those that we are seeing always during election periods, can temporarily stimulate the economy or generate economic activities, they are not substitute for structural reforms. Okay. Investment quality and strong institutions are always needed for sustained growth. So the evidence that we have seen indicates that, to cut it short, no, the evidence indicates that growth constraints are institutional rather than purely financial in nature. Again, we're taking this from a systems thinking perspective. Okay? Maybe you're asking now, you've been talking about governance, confidence, but I want to emphasize this one. Why institutions matter? Okay? Because institutions anchor expectations. The literature is very clear about that. Okay? Predictable rules, they lower risk premiums. They attract long-term investments. And when credibility improves, when trust is regained, the same budget, the same government budget can deliver more outcomes. And in a tight fiscal space that we're currently experiencing right now, institutions matter enormously. Okay? Now, let's go to some policy implications. Okay? So what follows from the evidence that we have generated here, from the descriptive and the simulations that we have generated? Okay? We need to strengthen pre- and post-election fiscal discipline. It's, as I understand, it's easier said than done. But the point is, we need to protect capital-forming investments. We need to improve transparency and accountability and treat elections as accountability tests rather than spending surges. Okay? These steps, as what we have established earlier, okay, These steps can convert temporary boosts from election spending into durable, real, and long-term gains. Okay. So next slide, please. So let's go back to the brief futures thinking definition I gave you earlier. And I invite you to think about this one. Okay? I request that you think about this after the webinar. Syempre nagpa-assignment na, but it's a good way to process, no? What you have heard, whether you agree or you disagree. So let's think about that backcasting I mentioned earlier. Backcasting asks us to define the economy we want by 2030 and 2040. And DepDev is very clear. The ambition 2040, resilient, inclusive, investment-led, predominantly middle-income society, and then we work backwards. But for you to be able to work backwards, it is important that we ask the critical questions. What institutions must function by 2030? What behaviors must change this 2026? Why am I asking this question? It is because the future of the Philippines and the Philippine economy depends on the decision that we take now, not tomorrow, now. Okay? So some conclusions. Sustainable growth does not come from cycles. It can also come from institutions. It comes from institutions, credibility, and execution. And from the results that we've gathered, election-driven stimulus can help. Of course, we're not discounting the boost that it's actually giving to the economy. But after the election, only governance turns it into lasting development. We cannot simply just print our way or dance our way to credibility, because we all know, and private sector is very adept with this one. Markets respond to trust, discipline, and enforcement. So to end this presentation, the final slide, please. Not theory, not slogans, not simply sheer spending. What stabilizes economies, especially in a VUCA economic environment, is credibility. And credibility is built through good governance. And again, I would like to emphasize that the reform journey is a collective one. It is not the task of government alone. It is a collective effort, one that requires discipline, accountability, and shared commitment, shared vision to where we want to bring the Philippine economy in the future. And on that note, maraming salamat po, and I am very excited to discuss this with you.